Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, a sleepy summary. As we prepare for rest, please know this summary is a gentle introduction intended to honor, not simplify, the original narrative. It is my hope that these condensed words offer a calming companion and inspire you to explore the full brilliance of the original work. The true depth awaits in the richness of the pages themselves. Somewhere deep in the warm and fading afternoon of the ancient world, a man named Lucius Annius Seneca sat down to write letters to his friend. His friend's name was Lucilius, a good man, a man trying to be better, a man who was probably, like you right now, a little tired and a little uncertain, wondering what any of this is all about and whether he is spending his days the way he ought to. Seneca had many things to say to this friend, and he said them slowly, warmly, over many years. And if you are very still and close your eyes just a little, you can almost hear him now, speaking in the low and unhurried voice of someone who has already made his peace with things, who has looked long enough at the world that it no longer startles him, who has decided that what matters most is not splendid or dramatic, but quiet, interior, and entirely within reach. Seneca was old when he wrote these letters. He had been young once, and brilliant and ambitious, and he had risen very high in the court of Rome, which in those days was a place of dazzling power and dazzling danger, and he had survived emperors and exile and the grinding machinery of political life, and somewhere in all of that he had decided that the Stoics were right, that the philosophers who taught that virtue is the only true good, and that everything else, money, fame, health, the warm approval of other people, is merely preferred or dispreferred but never finally essential. Those philosophers had seen something real, had put their finger on something solid in the fluid and treacherous world. And so he wrote to Lucilius, letter after letter, not to lecture, but to think aloud, to encourage, to coax his friend and himself toward the life that the wise man leads, which is a life of reason and attention and a certain beautiful steadiness of soul. The very first thing Seneca tells his friend, right at the beginning, before anything else, is about time. He says, guard your time. He says this because he means it deeply, because he has watched how people lose their hours, how they let their days drain away into other people's agendas and the noise of society and the hollow ceremonies of ambition, and how at the end they look back and cannot find themselves in any of it, cannot find a single hour that was truly their own. He says that we should gather time up, the way a careful person gathers berries from a hedgerow, handful by handful, and keep it. He says that some time is simply taken from us, which is unavoidable, but that much time is merely lost, which is wasteful, and much more is simply squandered, which is a kind of slow tragedy. He wants Lucilius to wake up to his own life, to feel the weight of each day as something precious and limited and real. There is something in this that feels like a hand on your shoulder, gentle but firm. Seneca is not scolding, he is whispering. He has done the math, and the hours are fewer than they seem, and the life well lived is one that is actually inhabited, moment by moment, rather than raced through in a blur of busyness and distraction. So settle back now, breathe, let your body grow a little heavier against whatever you are lying on, and let Seneca's words come at you slowly, one at a time, the way leaves come down in autumn, drifting, unhurried, landing softly. He talks about reading. He tells Lucilius to read deeply rather than widely. This is a gentle and almost lullaby-like idea when you sit with it. There were men in Rome, there are still men everywhere, who collect books the way others collect coins or silver, stacking them up as a kind of display, moving quickly from author to author without resting long enough in any of them to take anything away. Seneca says this is not reading, it is restlessness wearing reading's costume. He says to find a few great thinkers and live with them, to read them again and again the way you return to a garden you love, noticing different things each time, the same truths revealing new facets as you yourself change. He says that a person who is everywhere is nowhere, and a person who has too many friends has none, and a person who reads everything reads nothing. And all of this is the same lesson wearing different clothes, depth over breadth, presence over accumulation, the still pool over the rushing river. He says to eat simply. This comes up again and again in the letters, in different forms, the idea that the body should be kept in a kind of respectful but not indulgent state, neither starved nor stuffed, neither hardened for its own sake nor softened by too much comfort. He tells Lucilius about days he spent eating the food of the poor, just bread and water and a few simple things, not to perform poverty, but to practice it quietly, to know in his body and not just his mind that the catastrophe he most feared was not actually a catastrophe, that he could live simply and live well. There is a tenderness in this, a kind of self-testing that is not harsh but curious, a man sitting with his plain food and noticing that he is fine, that the world has not ended, that the soul is fed by something other than the table. He talks about crowds, and here his voice drops a little lower, becomes more confessional. He says that he comes home from spending time in crowds feeling somehow diminished, a little coarser, a little less himself, as though the noise and the friction of many people has worn something away. He does not say this to be aristocratic or superior. He says it because he has noticed it and he trusts his observations, and because he thinks Lucilius ought to be careful about the company he keeps, not in a suspicious or paranoid way, but in the way that a careful person is thoughtful about where they put their energy and attention, because character is contagious, both the good kind and the bad kind, and without noticing it, we can absorb the anxieties and the shallownesses and the grumbling resentments of the people we spend time with. And before we know it, we have become a little more like them. He says that retirement is beautiful. He says this with the pleasure of a man who has finally stopped running. He spent so long in the center of things, in the hot and hectic middle of Roman life, attending on emperors and navigating the complicated friendships of powerful people, and now he is outside all that, and he walks in his garden, and he thinks, and he writes, and he is more fully himself than he has ever been. He does not think everyone should retire from the world, not at all, but he thinks that everyone should have some equivalent of the garden, some daily withdrawal from the noise, some practice of stillness that belongs to them alone, where the inner life can breathe. Let your breathing slow now. There is no hurry. The letters are long and they are patient, and they are going to take you somewhere soft. Seneca is walking beside you, and he is in no rush at all. He talks about death. He talks about it often, but not grimly, more the way a person might talk about winter, acknowledging it, preparing for it, not pretending it isn't coming, but also not allowing the anticipation of it to spoil the warmth of right now. The Stoics had a practice they called meditatio mortis, the meditation on death, which sounds more frightening than it is. The idea was simple. Remind yourself gently, regularly that you will die, that the people you love will die, that this particular afternoon will never come again. Not to make yourself anxious, but to make yourself present. Because the strange truth is that when we really feel our mortality, when we let it in rather than keeping it at the edge of consciousness, life becomes brighter and not darker, more immediate, more vivid, more precious. Seneca says that the person who has learned to die has unlearned how to be a slave. And what he means by that is that most of our servility, our frantic people-pleasing, our scrambling for approval, our terror of loss, comes from our unexamined fear of the worst. And when we have actually sat quietly with the worst and looked at it and seen that even it is bearable, we become genuinely free in a way that nothing external can grant us. He talks about poverty the same way. He says that we should occasionally live as if we had very little, for a few days at a time, not as punishment, but as medicine, to purge the soft and spreading anxiety that comes from always having more than enough. He lived in a time of extraordinary luxury among the Roman wealthy class, and he could see, he describes it with almost sad clarity, how much misery came from abundance, how the man with many houses was tormented by the thought of losing them, how the man with hundreds of slaves was kept awake by the fear of managing them all, how the feast giver sweated over the next feast, how the man who had everything was somehow always aware of the people who had slightly more. Against all this, he proposed the simple experiment: eat plain food, wear plain clothes, sleep on a hard bed for a night. Notice that you are still yourself. Notice that the self does not depend on the upholstery. There is something deeply reassuring about this, lying here in the dark or the half-dark, feeling the weight of your own body, breathing slowly. Seneca is telling you that you are already enough, that the essential you requires very little. That what you are, at bottom, is not a collection of possessions or achievements or the opinions other people hold of you, but something quieter and more durable, something that will still be there in the morning when the noise has not yet started, something that goes with you even into the longest darkness. He writes about friendship. He says that a friend is not someone you keep for their usefulness or their status, or because they happen to be pleasant at dinner parties. He says that true friendship is rare and slow to grow and worth tending with enormous care, because the true friend is someone with whom you can share your inner life without editing it, someone who sees you whole and still chooses to be there, someone in whose presence you do not perform. He says that you must first judge whether a person is worthy of your friendship and then trust them completely, because the alternative, confiding in no one, guarding yourself from everyone, is a kind of solitary prison that wisdom does not recommend. He says to keep a few such friendships and honor them, which means showing up, paying attention, being honest even when honesty is uncomfortable. He talks about anger. He tells Lucilius that anger is a temporary madness, that when we are in its grip, we say and do things that we, the steadier, wiser, more rested version of ourselves, would never choose. He says that anger always believes it is justified, which is part of its particular deception, and that the angered person always believes they are responding proportionally to a genuine wrong, when in fact they are mostly responding to their own discomfort, their own bruised pride, their own fear dressed up as righteous indignation. He suggests delaying. He suggests that when you feel anger rising, you should simply pause, breathe, wait, not forever, but long enough for the first hot wave to pass, because it is almost always in that first hot wave that the damage is done. He is not asking anyone to never feel anger, but to put a little space between the feeling and the action, and in that space to ask, is this how I want to be? Is this who I am? He writes about travel, and here he is gently teasing. He says that people travel to escape themselves and it never works. He says that you carry your mind with you wherever you go, and if your mind is restless in Rome, it will be restless in Athens, and if it is dissatisfied in summer, it will find reasons to be dissatisfied in winter. And if it is unhappy now, it will be unhappy on the boat, and unhappy on arrival, and unhappy in the foreign city among the foreign customs, because the source of the unhappiness is not the location, but the inner life. He is not saying don't travel, he is saying don't travel in order to flee yourself, because yourself will beat you to the destination. The work, he says, is always interior. The transformation, if it comes from within, softer now. The letters are washing over you like slow warm water. Seneca's voice is far and near at once, the way the voices in sleep are sometimes both inside and outside, both now and very long ago. He writes about the philosophical life, and he is consistently trying to make it sound less forbidding, less austere, less like the image people have of the stone-faced Stoic who feels nothing and wants nothing. He says that the wise man still feels pleasure. He still enjoys food and wine and good conversation and the company of friends and the beauty of a well-turned phrase. He still feels grief when he loses people he loves. He is not a statue. What is different about him is not the absence of feeling, but the relationship to feeling. He sees his feelings as weather. He experiences them without being swept away by them. He notices the storm and does not mistake it for the sky. He can be cold without becoming coldness, warm without becoming wildfire. He has, Seneca says, a kind of equanimity, which is not the same as indifference, but is more like the steadiness of a tree in wind, bending but not breaking, rooted deeply enough to move without being moved away. He talks about the body. He says to take care of it, to exercise it, but not to make it the center of your project. He was himself apparently not very strong, prone to illness, and he writes about his health struggles with a kind of gentle humor, noting that the body is always going to have its complaints, and the wise man listens to them, but does not let them dominate the agenda. He says that athletes who spend all their time on their bodies have missed the point, that it is one thing to have a fine instrument and another to know what music to play on it, and the music is always the inner life, the character, the quality of attention and thought and feeling that you bring to your hours. He talks about money at considerable length, and here too his point is not that money is evil or that poverty is virtuous in itself, but that the love of money, the anxiety about money, the restless pursuit of always having more, these are what corrode a life. He says that wealth is like seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. He says that he knows rich men who are among the most miserable people he has ever encountered, trapped by their wealth the way a bird is trapped by a gilded cage, technically comfortable and yet unable to fly. He says that contentment is the greatest wealth, and he means something specific by this, not resignation, not settling, not the defeated acceptance of whatever comes, but a genuine satisfaction with what is, rooted in the understanding that the truly essential things are already yours. He tells Lucilius to study philosophy. He says this with great warmth, as though offering him the most comfortable chair in the house. He says that philosophy is not an ornament but a cure, not something you put on to look impressive, but something you take in to actually feel better, to suffer less, to live more wisely and more freely. He says that philosophy is the only study that makes us better rather than merely more informed, that all other disciplines add to what we know while philosophy, when it works, changes what we are. He talks about Epicurus with notable affection, which surprises some readers of a Stoic letter writer. But Seneca had a broad and generous intellectual curiosity, and he found good things in all the schools, and he quotes Epicurus often, usually something about simplicity or about the pleasures of friendship, the pleasures of thinking, the pleasures of a quiet and examined life. He says to read all the good thinkers, to take wisdom wherever it is found, like bees gathering from different flowers to make a single honey. He talks about exile. He had been exiled under Claudius, sent away from Rome to Corsica for 8 years, and though he wrote other works during that time that spoke of exile with some bitterness, by the time of these letters to Lucilius, he has reached a kind of peace with it, a retrospective appreciation for what it taught him. He says that the wise man is never really in exile, because the wise man is never fully dependent on the particular place he happens to be. He says that the whole world is our country, that the Stoic idea of cosmopolitanism, the world as one city, all human beings as fellow citizens, means that wherever you are home. He says that what is truly yours cannot be taken from you by banishment or confiscation or any external force, because what is truly yours is always inside you, in the character you have built, and the thoughts you think, and the way you face what happens to you. He writes about the present moment. He says to live in it. He says this over and over in different ways, with different examples, with different urgency or gentleness, depending on the mood of the letter. He says that the mind is most often elsewhere, anticipating the future with anxiety or longing, or reliving the past with regret or nostalgia, and that in all this shuttling back and forth the actual present moment, the one real window of experience and action that we ever have, is left unattended. He says, be here, he says. The good life is not something you arrange for later, it is something you do now with what you have, where you are. He says that every day should be lived as though it were both the first and the last, with the freshness of beginning and the seriousness of an ending. The words are coming slower now. You can feel them settling over you like a very thin and very soft blanket. Seneca is still there, still writing, still thinking in his garden in the long Latin afternoon, and his thoughts are coming to you across 2,000 years like light from a very patient star. He talks about how to handle adversity. He talks about it in a way that is not brittle or boastful, not the clenched jaw stoicism of the man who insists he feels nothing, but thoughtful and honest, the philosophy of someone who has actually suffered and is reporting back from that territory. He says that difficulties are in a sense our teachers, that the easy life produces a certain softness of character that is actually a vulnerability, that the person who has never been tested does not know what they are made of and is therefore secretly afraid, and that the person who has been tested and survived knows something about themselves that cannot be taken away. He uses the image of fire and gold. Fire does not harm gold, he says, it purifies it, burns off what is not gold so that what remains is more fully itself. He says that the great man is made by circumstances that would crush the ordinary man. He says this not to glorify suffering, but to remove the terror of it, to say, if it comes, and it will come in some form, you can bear it. More than bear it, you can use it. He talks about the fear of pain. He says that we often suffer more from the imagination of pain than from pain itself, that we lie awake dreading things that either never come or that, when they come, turn out to be survivable in ways we could not have predicted. He says that the mind has a remarkable capacity to adapt, that people endure things they thought would destroy them and find themselves still standing on the other side, sometimes humbler, sometimes stronger, sometimes changed in ways they cannot yet name but can feel. He says that we should not torture ourselves in advance by rehearsing catastrophes. We should prepare practically and without drama, and then get on with the actual day, which contains, if we are paying attention, quite a lot that is worth attending to. He writes about virtue. He returns to this word again and again, and in his writing it never becomes stale, because he is always approaching it from a new angle, finding a new example, a new way of making it feel real and immediate and human. He says that virtue is the only thing that is good without qualification, the only thing that cannot be turned to bad ends, the only thing that remains good no matter the circumstances. Money can be used for good or ill. Intelligence can be used for good or ill. Even health, even long life, can be good or bad depending on what you do with them. But virtue, the disposition to act with courage and justice and wisdom and temperance, to treat other people well, to tell the truth, to meet the world with steadiness and care. This is simply good, and it is also, he says, sufficient for happiness, which is the most radical claim in all of Stoicism. The idea that the good person is happy even on the rack, even in exile, even in poverty. Because their happiness does not depend on what is happening around them, but on what is happening inside them. He writes about old age. He writes about it beautifully, without the frantic denial that so many people bring to aging, and without the false cheerfulness that tries to pretend it is all fine and nothing is lost. He says that old age has its own pleasures, its own particular freedom, the freedom of someone who has mostly stopped caring about what strangers think, who has put down the heavy social armor piece by piece, and finds that life is lighter without it. He says that the appetite falls away in old age, and that this is not a loss but a relief, that the passions cool, and in the cooling leave behind something cleaner and more peaceful, like a sky after a storm. He says that he looks at his aging face and aging body with something approaching affection, the way you might look at an old house that has sheltered you well, with gratitude for the years of service and equanimity about the slow settling and weathering. He says that what matters is not how long a life is, but how full it is, not measured in years, but in living, not in the quantity of days, but in the quality of attention with which those days were met. He talks about letters themselves, about the intimacy of the form, about how writing to a friend is a way of being with them even across distance, and how reading a letter is a way of hearing a voice that is otherwise silent. He says that when he writes to Lucilius, he feels Lucilius with him, and when Lucilius reads his letters, he should feel Seneca there too, as a presence, a companion, a voice that says, I too have wondered about this, I too have struggled with that, I too have failed in the morning and tried again in the afternoon, and gone to bed uncertain whether I have made any progress at all. He says that the consolation of philosophy is partly the consolation of knowing that the most thoughtful and serious people who ever lived wrestled with the same questions that we wrestle with, and that they did not resolve them all, but they did live with them wisely, and they did find a kind of peace. He talks about reason. He says that reason is the divine element in us, the part that connects us to the Logos, the rational principle that the Stoics believed governed the universe, the great intelligence or order of which each human mind is a tiny and temporary part. He says that to live according to reason is to live according to nature, because reason is our nature, our specific and essential nature, the thing that distinguishes us and defines us and gives us our particular human dignity. He says that the animals live well when they follow their instincts because their instincts are their reason, but we live well when we follow ours, which means not the instinct of the moment, not the appetite or the fear or the flash of anger, but the deeper and slower faculty that can look at the whole situation and ask, what is actually good here? What would a wise person do? The room is very quiet now. The letters are still coming, very slowly, like single notes played on a stringed instrument in a distant room. Seneca keeps writing. He always kept writing. Even near the end, even under Nero, even when he knew that the end might come at any moment in the form of an imperial messenger with a bad letter, he kept writing to Lucilius, kept thinking aloud, kept encouraging his friend. He talks about the soul. He talks about it with the ease of someone who thinks about it constantly, who has lived in daily conversation with his own inner life for so long that the soul is as familiar to him as his own hands. He says that the soul is our guest in the body, a temporary resident, that the body is the inn and not the destination, and that we should care for it properly without confusing it for what matters most. He says that the soul grows through use, that it becomes stronger and clearer and more at peace the more deliberately we develop it, and that neglecting it, filling our lives with noise and distraction and meaningless sociability and the empty pursuit of status, is a kind of slow self-destruction that takes place too gradually for most people to notice until it is very late. He writes about freedom. Not political freedom, though that matters too, but interior freedom, the freedom of the self that has learned not to be enslaved by its own desires and fears. He says that the man who is ruled by his appetites is as much a slave as any person in chains, because he cannot help himself, because his behavior is determined not by what he has chosen, but by what happens to him, by what is offered to him, by the vagaries of circumstance and mood and the opinions of others. He says that the truly free person is the one who could lose everything and still be themselves, who could gain everything and still be themselves, who is the same person in a crowd and in solitude, in prosperity and in ruin, in youth and in age. This is what the Stoics called the inner citadel, and Seneca returns to it again and again, this idea of a self so well-founded that the storms of life cannot dislodge it. He writes about the gods, or about God, or about the universe, and here his language becomes most lyrical, most poetic, most beautiful. He says that God is present everywhere, that the divine permeates everything the way the sun permeates the air, that when you look at the sky or the sea or the stars, you are looking at the face of something immeasurably larger than yourself, something in which you participate and to which you belong. He is not certain about the details of theology, and he says so honestly, and he does not think certainty about these things is necessary for a good life, but he does think that some sense of belonging to something greater than the individual self, some sense of the world as a home and not a trap, some feeling of participation in a vast and ordered whole. This matters. This changes how you walk through your days. This softens the particular terror of being a small and temporary creature in a large and indifferent-seeming world. He talks about the famous Stoic concept of amor fati, the love of fate, though he does not use that exact phrase that came later from Marcus Aurelius and others. But the idea is there, woven through the letters, not just accepting what happens, but genuinely embracing it, finding a way to want what is, to love the particular shape of your own life with all its frustrations and losses and unexpected turns, because it is yours, because it is real, because it is the material from which you are making whatever you are making. He says that the Stoic does not merely endure what cannot be changed, but chooses it mentally and spiritually, refuses to be divided against their own experience, refuses the constant low-level war against reality that constitutes so much ordinary unhappiness. He talks about the brevity of life, and this is perhaps the most persistent drumbeat of the letters, the theme that everything else is a variation on. Vita brevis est, life is short, but his point is always that it is only short if it is wasted, that a fully inhabited life is not brief but spacious, that a single well-lived year contains more genuine experience than a decade of distracted drift. He says that old men on their deathbeds do not complain that life was too short. They complain that they let it pass unlived. They regret the hours given over to other people's expectations, the days lost to anxiety about things that never happened, the years spent accumulating what they never enjoyed. He says, don't do this. He says, start now. He says, the life you are waiting for is the one you are already living, and it is a gift, and it is running out, and there is still time. He writes about how to face a bad day, and this is one of the most practically warm things in all the letters, because Seneca clearly believes in the actual daily practice of philosophy, not just the grand theory of it. He says that when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, small and large, constantly and unpredictably, the trained mind has resources that the untrained mind does not. He says to remember what you have. He says to think of people who have faced worse and kept their dignity. He says to ask, does this matter in 10 years? In 1 year? In a month? He says to bring the long view to bear on the short experience, not to dismiss the short experience, but to see it in proportion, to feel the pain without being consumed by it, to endure the inconvenience without deciding that the world is therefore broken. He writes in some of the later letters about the nature of the self and the continuity of identity, about whether the person who wakes up tomorrow is the same as the person who went to sleep tonight, about whether the river is the same river after all its water has changed, about what exactly it is that persists through time and constitutes a single human life. These are the more abstract letters, the more strictly philosophical ones, and yet even here Seneca keeps his feet on the ground, keeps finding the practical implication, keeps asking, so what does this mean for how we live? He is not interested in philosophy as a purely intellectual game, as a set of puzzles to be solved in the study and then left there. He thinks philosophy is medicine, and he thinks it only works if you actually take it. He talks about his own mistakes, which is endearing. He is not the perfect Stoic sage describing from above a life he has already mastered. He is a man in the middle of the project, making progress but also backsliding, having good days and bad days, sometimes calm and sometimes irritable, sometimes serene and sometimes still susceptible to the small vanities and anxieties that he has been trying for decades to overcome. He says this openly because he does not want Lucilius to feel that the standard is perfection or that anything short of it is failure. He says that progress is the point, that the direction matters more than the destination, that the person who is becoming wiser is in a better condition than the person who has stopped trying, regardless of where either of them currently stands. He says to be patient with yourself. He says to keep going. He writes about gratitude, though not always using that word. He talks about how the ungrateful person is perpetually poor, always looking at what they don't have, always comparing upward, always feeling the absence of what they lack more vividly than the presence of what they possess. And he talks about how the grateful person is perpetually rich, not because they have more, but because they see more, because their attention is trained on what is there rather than what is missing, because they have learned to feel the weight and warmth of ordinary blessings. A good conversation, a peaceful evening, the presence of someone they love, the simple animal pleasure of a comfortable body in a comfortable place. He says that if you want more happiness, you should want what you have, and that this sounds like a riddle but is actually a practice, something you do with your attention, something you train over time. The night is deepening around the letters now. The words come like breath, slow and even, one after another, and you can feel yourself sinking gently, very gently, into the long and restful dark that Seneca himself described as one of life's simple gifts, the nightly return to something like peace, the body's own wisdom about when to stop. He writes about what we owe to others. He writes about it with great care, because the Stoic position on this is subtle and easily misunderstood. He says that we are social animals, that we belong to the human community not by convention, but by nature, that the individual flourishing of the Stoic sage is not a flourishing in isolation, but in relationship, that virtue is always expressed in how we treat other people, how we honor our obligations, how we contribute to the common good. He says that the wise man does not withdraw from society into a purely private happiness, but engages with the world with greater steadiness and less ego than the ordinary person, because he is not competing for the prizes the world offers, because he is not afraid of what the world can take from him, because he is free to be genuinely useful rather than performatively useful, genuinely kind rather than strategically kind. He talks about honesty. He says that the person of good character does not say different things to different audiences, does not present a different face in public and in private, does not tell people what they want to hear and think something else entirely. He says that the divided self is an exhausting self, that the effort of managing multiple contradictory personas is a tremendous waste of the very energy that ought to be going into actually living. He says to be the same person everywhere. He says to mean what you say and say what you mean. He says that simplicity of character, not simplicity of mind, but simplicity of intention, a single orientation toward what is true and good, is not a virtue of small people, but of free ones. He talks about learning from everyone. He says that wisdom is where you find it, that the Stoic should not be too proud or too tribal to learn from an Epicurean or a cynic or a slave or a child. He says that even a passerby in the street can say something that lodges in the mind and changes something permanently. He says to pay attention to all of it, to be always gathering, because philosophy is not a fixed destination you arrive at once and stay at forever, but a continuous movement, a lifelong project of refinement and attention, and the material for that project is everywhere, in every conversation and every experience and every quiet morning and every difficult afternoon. Near the end of what has been preserved of the letters, though there were many more that have been lost, drifting away on the long tide of history, Seneca is still at it, still writing, still thinking, still encouraging. He is under more pressure now. The political situation around him has darkened. Nero, who was his pupil once, and for whom he had such complicated hopes, has become something difficult and dangerous, and Seneca is watching the world around him with the particular clarity of someone who may not have much time left. And yet the letters remain warm, remain patient, remain interested in all the same things they were interested in at the beginning. How to spend your hours, how to treat people, how to face what comes, how to be free inside, how to love what is, how to die well. He says in one of the late letters that he has come to a kind of peace with the fact of his own ending, not a performance of peace, but an actual felt quietness about it, the way a person at the end of a long and good day feels genuinely tired and genuinely ready for sleep and does not fight it. He says that everything that has a beginning has an ending, and that this is not a tragedy but simply the shape of things, and that what matters is not whether the shape is round or square or longer or shorter, but whether the material inside it was good. He says that he is more his friend's possession than his own, and what he means by this is that his greatest satisfaction, looking back, is not in the books he wrote or the speeches he gave or the political positions he navigated, but in the people he loved and the conversations he had and the small daily contributions to other people's clarity and courage, that the letters themselves represent. He talks, in the end, about the community of the good, across time and space, the invisible fellowship of everyone who has ever tried to live thoughtfully, to be honest, to face their circumstances with something better than panic or despair or numb routine. He says that when we read the great philosophers and feel recognized by them, feel that they have said something we have felt but could not articulate, that recognition is not just intellectual but moral. It is one good person reaching across time and touching another. It is the conversation that never quite ends, because it does not depend on either party being alive. It is wisdom finding its way through the centuries like water, finding its way through stone. Slowly and patiently and with absolute certainty of arrival. He says that Lucilius is dear to him. He says this often, and he means it, and you can feel it even now, the warmth of an old man for a younger friend he is trying to help toward a better life, the generosity of someone who has worked something out and wants to share it, not to show off, but to give something real, something that will last. He says, be well. He says, keep reading, keep thinking, keep building the inner life. He says the good is not somewhere else. It is here, in the quality of attention you bring to this particular hour, in the small daily choices that seem inconsequential, but that, added together over a lifetime, constitute everything you will ever have been. And so the letters end, or seem to end, or at least the ones that have come down to us do, and Seneca puts down his pen somewhere in the Italian late afternoon and walks out into his garden. And the light is long and golden the way it is in autumn, and the garden is quiet. And he is an old man who has lived an enormous life full of suffering and beauty and error and insight, and he is at peace, or near enough to peace that the difference does not matter much. And perhaps he thinks of Lucilius far away reading the words that arrived by messenger, and perhaps he smiles, and perhaps he does not need to think of anything at all, but can just stand there in the garden in the long light, being exactly what he is, nothing more and nothing less, a man at the end of his days who has learned, slowly and painfully and imperfectly, to be present, to be grateful, to be still. And we are the inheritors of those letters. We who lie in the dark reading them or having them read to us, we who are also tired and also uncertain, we who also wonder whether we are spending our days well and loving the right things and building what needs to be built inside us before it is too late. We are the Lucilius that Seneca was always writing to. The letters were addressed to one friend, but they were meant for everyone, for any person in any century who was trying to live with some degree of wisdom and honesty and care, trying to hold lightly the things that should be held lightly and tightly, the things that should be held tight, trying to be free in the only way that is truly possible, from the inside out. So let the last thing you carry into sleep tonight be this: you are alive right now in this particular moment that will never come again, and that is enough, that is more than enough, that is everything. And the good life is not waiting for you somewhere in the future, but is available to you now in the quality of your attention and the steadiness of your character and the love you bring to the people and the work and the hours that are yours. Seneca said so. He said it 2,000 years ago in letters written in Latin in a Roman garden, and he is saying it still, and the saying of it is quiet and patient, and it will still be saying itself long after we are gone, patient as starlight, steady as the old philosophers who first had the strange and beautiful and entirely correct idea that the only thing worth having is the thing you already have. Your own mind, your own life, the present moment, the small and radical freedom to choose each day who you want to be. Rest now. You have been thinking enough for one night. The letters will still be there in the morning, and Seneca with them, and there is nothing urgent that cannot wait for the light.